You are now watching the official YouTube channel for the largest basketball manager game in the world. Join at BuzzerBeater.com if you think you can beat the buzzer.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to Bubbles BuzzerBeater, the official BuzzerBeater YouTube channel. I know in the last video that I had with Coco, we talked about the game engine changes and how passing affects, different offenses and defenses, and just kind of like how that adjusts potentially what tactics work well and what tactics don't. And today I wanted to go through a big statistic-based study, kind of review of how the tactics have performed in Season 62, and then compare them to how they performed in Season 61. So I primarily looked at the BuzzerBeater's best tournament for group play as my sample group, and BB Justin helped me with some of the data points here. But if you're not sure what exactly I'm talking about, essentially Season 62 has more assists, more points, and then the quote-unquote modern game engine, primarily with the changes to assists and passing, and how those can affect different tactics. So you can see in the post for the main news right there, as well as BB Justin's post in the forums talking about the changes a little bit more in depth as well. So some notes for the following statistics that we're about to go over. As I mentioned, the following stats only include B3 games from the group play from Season 61 and Season 62. So it doesn't include any of the knockout stage games or prior seasons. So I think it's a big enough sample size to make some educated guesses as to how the changes are impacting different offenses and defenses, but it is still a somewhat small sample size compared to the sheer number of games that are played each week. I also didn't include base offense or man-to-man in the study or in the report here, because that's the default offense that's ran for inactive bot teams, and the numbers were severely skewed. So I just didn't think that they were that helpful or showed any useful statistics. You'll also notice that there's a non-game day prep game section, and I think that was probably going to be the most useful section. I do include an all games section finding, but the all game section includes games with both correct and incorrect game day prep guesses, so gives a indication as to what might be happening in those games with those setups, but the non-game day prep games are probably a little bit more useful. And then I only included tactic combos with 15 plus all games played in both Season 61 and Season 62. And I just did that for sample size purposes to make sure that they're big enough to more accurately assess how each tactics are, performing for the changes in 62 opposed to how they performed in Season 61. And then just a final kind of last reminder to keep in mind that regardless of tactics played, sometimes it's just the fact that the stronger team is going to win, whether they're playing look inside, motion, or inside isolation, and the weaker teams are going to lose regardless of how perfectly they've prepped out their offense and defensive tactics. So these are meant to be some things to think about and to notice general trends, but not as an exact science. So the main offense, or the most popular offense, ran in BuzzerBeater's best group play, both in Season 61 and Season 62, is your standard look inside man-to-man. And you'll see in Season 61 there were 182 games played where teams won 56% of the time when they ran look inside man-to-man. This doesn't count, or this doesn't take into consideration what the opponent ran against them, only that when a team ran look inside man-to-man for themselves, they won 56% of the time. And then you can also see the average point differential at a positive 1.8 or plus 1.8 in those games. As for non-game day prep games in Season 61, there were 135 games that teams ran look inside man-to-man, and there was not game day prep involved. And in those games, there's a 60.7% win rate. So really, really high for look inside man-to-man games that didn't involve game day prep. Now, if you go over to Season 62, you'll see that the games played stay relatively the same at 175 for all games and 134 for non-game day prep games. But the win rates do decrease slightly for both categories, where average point differential stays about the same, but the win rate does drop down by 2.9% for all games and then 9.2% for games that did not have game day prep. So it looks like, based on the changes, look inside man-to-man is not performing as well. It's still, more times than not, look inside man-to-man is going to work really well, but there is a drop-off from Season 61 to Season 62 for how effective look inside has been, at least in regards to win rate when that offense and defense combo is played. Going on to the second most commonly ran setup, motion man-to-man. You'll see Season 61, there was 101 all games played with a 43.6% win rate. And then if you look at just the non-game day prep games, you have 89 games of motion man-to-man ran with a win rate percent of only 42.7 and a negative point differential for both all games as well as non-game day prep games. However, in Season 62, this is where motion has been very, very effective, and you can see drastic increases in the win rate, and then a about similar spot for average point differential, but the win rates are 15 and 13% better in respective to Season 61. So motion man-to-man has been an offense, at least at the B3 group play level, that is working really, really well with the changes in Season 62. Next, we have low post man-to-man. Low post man-to-man, this is going to be one of the bigger downfalls that I noticed through this, but low post man-to-man setup has not been performing very well in Season 62. So you can see the comparisons right there. In 61, it was one of the better win rate setups of low post offense, man-to-man defense in BuzzerBeater, where a lot of teams that ran it were winning 58 and 61% of the time for those non-game day prep games versus all games. However, in Season 62, it has been a bit of a slog for low post man-to-man. It has not worked very well. So you can see across the board, the win rate and average point differential for all games as well as non-game day prep games are both very, very low. Dropping 16.8% for all games and 19.2% for non-game day prep games. And then the point differential is also much worse. So it essentially went from a tactic combo where teams were winning, 5 to 6 times every time that they ran this setup, more to only 4 times. So this has been one of the big losers, and there'll be a slide at the end that kind of goes over which ones went well and which ones did not go well for Season 62 group play. But this is one of the bigger losers, is the low post man-to-man differences between Season 61 and Season 62. Next up, we have patient man-to-man. And then this is another one where I think it's a little bit harder to get a good understanding of how this offense setup is ran, because as most of you know, there's a standard patient offense as well as a reverse patient offense that both function very differently. I didn't get a good grasp as to if it's working better or worse compared to Season 61 versus Season 62. You'll see in the kind of stats for Season 62 that there are slight drops in win rate and average point differential, win rates for the non-game day prep games and all game sections, but the average point differential have actually both increased slightly. So I think it kind of washes out, where I think it's performing about the same as expected from Season 61. But yeah, so if you have thoughts on how that plays into your plans for running patient or reverse patient, let me know. But I think from this study of B3 group play games, at least, I haven't noticed a big change for how it functions or how effective it has been for teams. The next most often played tactic combo is look inside 3-2 zone. And then this is going to be the beginning of our 3-2 zone conversation. And the reason I say that is you can see the win rates for this tactic combo in Season 61, where 51% win rate and then 53.1% for non-game day prep games. About what I expect, pretty standard for 50-50 about the time you're going to win look inside 3-2 zone at that level. However, for Season 62, the look inside 3-2 zone has not been a combo that's worked well or led to success, where you can see the win rate is down by 10.3% and 11.4% in those games, and average point differential is also decreased slightly. So 3-2 zone look inside has performed worse in Season 62 than Season 61, and it's just a sample of 54 games in Season 62, but I think that's big enough to kind of start forming some opinions about how effective 3-2 zone is working in the new game engine, and if passing is breaking through a 3-2 zone better now in the new game engine. The next one is push the ball man-to-man. And push the ball is another one where I don't know what to make of it because the win rate percentages, especially in non-game day prep games, shot up a lot by 9.1%. But in all games, it stayed about the same. And then for the average point differential for both games, or both sections for all games or non-game day prep games, the average point differential actually went down. And this could be in part where push the ball is typically an offense that teams run when they know that they're going to win and they're just trying to run up the score for point differential for kind of like seeding purposes. But the win rate shot up slightly for all games and a lot for non-game day prep games, but the point differential went down. And this could be a factor of like if a team plays against a bot and wins by 100, that's obviously going to impact how many games are reflecting the accurate information. And then there's a couple that are just showing like, oh, a team won by 100. So push the ball is another one that could be skewed a little bit, but it looks like it's functioning relatively the same. However, the non-game day prep section for push the ball has increased a lot, so that is an interesting thing to keep track of as well. And now inside isolation. So inside isolation is going to be one of the bigger winners that I noticed. For those of you that have watched my tactic breakdown or like tactic tiers that I did with mediocrity, you'll know that I'm not a very big advocate of inside isolation, at least in the prior game engine. However, with the new changes, it seems like it's working much more effectively and much more how it was designed to work in the first place. And it has been one of the big winners for Season 62. What I mean by that is in 27 games for B3 group play in Season 62, teams are winning 59% of the games with inside isolation man-to-man tactic combos. In non-game day prep games, that's also 59%. So it has been one of the more effective offense and defense combos, and point differentials are both much, much better in Season 62 than Season 61 as well. So inside isolation has worked incredibly well in Season 62 for whatever reason. And now we get to Princeton. So Princeton is another one of the big winners where another offense where I think in the past I've said that Princeton is not an offense that I will ever really run. In B3 last season in Season 61, you'll see it had an exactly 50% win rate. in all games, and then in non-game day prep games, it was 44%. So you essentially had an okay shot to win if the opponent is guessing game day prep incorrectly, I'd imagine. But in non-game day prep games, it was not a reliable source of offense. And then the man-to-man defense, I think, is probably pretty standard still. But Princeton offense wasn't something that was historically working well. But in Season 62, it is something where it's a slightly smaller sample size, but the win rates have both been really, really good, of 65.4% for all games and 66.7% for non-game day prep games. So you can see those increases right there. And in general, it's just working a lot better with the new passing changes and the way that the offenses are functioning. Then we have run and gun man-to-man. This is another one where I feel like outside offenses in general are working a little bit better, and inside offenses aren't as overpowered or substantially better like they were in like historic old buzzer beater times. But you can see the comparisons between season 61 and 62 there as well. Win rates relatively the same for all games, where I think run and gun has been another offense where historically you're running run and gun when you're in a favorable matchup, so it's not always the most accurate thing to take a look at. And then especially with the average point differential in the non-game day prep games, you'll see plus 20.6. That is a huge average point differential, where a couple of those had to have been like blowouts against really bad teams or bot teams in B3 group play. But it still looks like it is functioning well as an offense with the new game engine. And then we have motion 3-2 zone. So this is going to be one of the bigger drop-offs for tactic combos. And motion man-to-man had some very positive outlooks for it. However, the 3-2 zone with motion, it is not working as well. So you can see it was one of the more effective offense-defense combos in Season 61 for B3, where teams are winning 62.5% of the time for all of the games and 57.1% for non-game day prep games. But in Season 62, it's been a very, very big drop-off, and both for all games as well as non-game day prep games, sitting at about 45-46% win rate, and the negative point differential for both of them, which are pretty substantial drop-offs from Season 61. So once again, that 3-2 zone looks like it's struggling with the effectiveness of passing and like the higher score, more assist aspect of buzzer beater. And then we have low post 3-2 zone, and this is perhaps the worst combo in terms of how it performed in 61 to 62 that there has been shown so far. So low post man-to-man looked like it had regressed some. It looks like 3-2 zone defenses have regressed some. So this combo of low post and 3-2 zone historically wasn't like a super effective combo for teams in Season 61, with those 48.1% win rate and 45% win rate. However, those have both regressed substantially, and it is one of the worst tactic combos that you could have ran in B3 group play this season, especially if there was no game day prep involved in the game. So you'll see the win rate of 21.4% for low post 3-2 zone if you were running that and there was no game day prep in the game. It's essentially you're only winning 1 out of every 5 times that you're playing this tactic combo setup. And then similarly, patient 3-2 zone. Once again, patient's hard to kind of categorize because of the reverse patient aspect and the way that different patient offenses function. I didn't have a strong take for this, so the average point differential both went down for Season 62, but the win rates both went up slightly. This is also getting to the point where the sample size is probably just a little bit too small, but I still wanted to include it just because it did technically meet that threshold of 15 games for both of those B3 season group plays. But yeah, so not a lot of strong thoughts on patient 3-2 zone, but 3-2 zone is once again not performing very well for Season 62. And then the last one, and the only other defense that's present on this with 2-3 zone look inside. And 2-3 zone look inside don't have a whole lot of information about it, and the sample size, once again, is relatively small. But the win rates are decreased for all of the games. However, if there's no game day prep involved, 2-3 zone look inside was performing pretty well with a 62.5% win rate. So essentially it's just like 5 of the 8 games were wins, so not like a huge sample size. Not a whole lot to take from that, but 2-3 zone is something that I want to start testing out more, and I think more teams will kind of work with and test how 2-3 zone works with more offense combos. Look inside 2-3 zone is something you'll probably see a lot more moving forward, especially if there's teams with a lot of like inside scoring and inside defense at their small forward position. So just a interesting thing right there as well. And then this is just a recap of the big winners and losers from this experiment or from the study. So the winners for the best tactic combos in terms of like which ones have worked or like increased in effectiveness from season 61 to season 62. We have the inside isolation, Princeton, motion, and run and gun. So the 3 outside offenses and then inside isolation, all of them with the man-to-man defense were working really well. And then the losers, you see a lot of the low post look inside on there, as well as the motion 3-2 zone. And this just leads me to believe once again that 3-2 zone is not as overpowered or as effective as it used to be with the new game engine changes. And you'll see the 3-2 zone show up 3 different spots on there for the losers category. And then just a quick bonus one. I didn't want to include this in the main section, but outside isolation is something that I think is an offense that has also been fixed along with inside isolation and Princeton. And the sample size is just so small, it's hard to make any big conclusions about it. But in season 62, the win rates for teams that played outside isolation man-to-man were 88.8% and 83.3%. So I think there's only one team that lost a game when they ran outside isolation man-to-man. And then the point differential, it looks like a team got slaughtered in like one game for it maybe, but for season 61, the point differential was very, very high. And then for season 62, the point differential still like super positive, plus 13.6, plus 10.8. So you see the big drop off, but I don't think it's reflective of like what actually happened. It might have just been one poor game, or season 61, it might have just been some games against like a bot or two for the like drastically high point differential for season 61. But outside isolation is another thing that when ran in the few games that it was ran in season 62, BuzzerBeater's best group play, it did work really, really well. So looking at this, I know there's a lot of different conclusions that you can make, but which tactic combos are you interested in trying out based on this information or based on anything that you've noticed with your specific team? I know I want to start testing inside isolation more, and I've already done so. I also want to start testing out Princeton and outside isolation more, as I kind of view those as the big winners. And then 2-3 zone's the other one where I want to test it out a little bit more. 3-2 zone, I'm a little bit more scared to play after looking at this data, just because I don't think it's working as well, and man-to-man might be a better defense overall. But please leave me your thoughts. Let me know what you're thinking about in terms of this, and I will be back again with another video very, very shortly. Thanks, everyone.